She looked like just another elderly black woman waiting quietly in the airport lounge. No one paid her much attention until one flight attendant decided she didn't belong in first class. Evelyn Turner didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply handed over her boarding pass and waited calm and composed even when it was slapped out of her hand. But when the airline official arrived and greeted her with "Mrs. Turner, we've been expecting you," everything changed. The woman they humiliated. She wasn't just a passenger. She owned the entire airline. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe with the bell turned on so you never miss a story like this. The soft clinking of porcelain cups echoed through the private first-class lounge at Kennedy International Airport. Above a chandelier diffused warm light over leather seats and frosted glass partitions. Attendants moved quietly, refilling espresso trays, adjusting newspapers. A murmur of conversations hung in the air, blending with the hum of distant gates announcing boarding calls. And there, by the tall panoramic window overlooking the tarmac, sat Evelyn Turner. She was a black woman in her late 70s, her presence understated yet striking. Her skin smooth, deep brown, caught the gold of the afternoon light. She wore an emerald green dress, simple but meticulously chosen, and a pearl brooch rested above her heart like a quiet signature. Draped over one arm was a lightweight shawl, and beside her leaned a polished maple cane with an ivory handle worn in places from years of steady use. Evelyn's silver hair had been swept into soft waves that framed her face with gentle precision. Every inch of her posture spoke of self-respect. She wasn't here to impress. She didn't need to. She had seen more decades than most of the travelers around her had earned every one of them and carried them with elegance. To most, she was invisible. That wasn't new. Across the lounge, a barista glanced at her, then quickly turned back toward a couple in tailored suits. A receptionist offered a tighter smile to a white businessman than she had to Evelyn minutes earlier. Small things, quiet things. But Evelyn noticed them all. She always did. She'd learned long ago that being overlooked was its own kind of power. As a younger woman, she used to feel it burn those moments, when her presence was ignored, her intelligence underestimated. Now it didn't sting. It gave her room. Room to think. Room to observe. Room to let others reveal who they truly were. A low voice stirred her from her thoughts. "Ma'am," came a gentle tone. Evelyn looked up. A young black man, tall, polished, early 30s, stood before her. He wore a navy blazer over a charcoal gray sweater, the kind of effortless style that suggested success without needing to announce it. In his hand was a sleek tablet half closed. "Would you like my seat?" he asked with quiet deference. His name, she would later learn, was Jordan Ellis, a rising tech executive from Atlanta in town for a corporate summit. But in that moment, he was simply a man, raised right. Evelyn smiled, softly, gratefully. "Thank you, young man," she replied, her voice warm but firm. "But I'm quite all right where I am." Jordan gave a small nod, not pressing, but something in his eyes lingered. Not pity, never that, but recognition, respect, maybe even curiosity. He glanced once more before returning to his seat across the aisle, and still no one else noticed her. Near the check-in podium, two first-class staff members scrolled through manifests and peered subtly at the waiting area. One of them, a woman in her mid-40s with a sharply pulled-back bun and a stiff uniform, scanned the room as if selecting who truly belonged in this space. Her eyes hovered on Evelyn for a beat too long, registering the cane, the age. The dark skin then moved on with a barely-there purse of the lips. Evelyn caught it. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. She simply folded her hands again atop her cane and turned her gaze to the window. Outside, a jet coasted toward its gate, its lights blinking in the dusk. She had been many things in her life. A daughter, a nurse, a mother, a widow, a community leader, and now to the world. Moving briskly past her, she was just another old woman sitting quietly in the corner. Let them believe that she knew exactly who she was. Caroline Reeves stood at the far end of the first-class check-in counter, her posture impossibly straight like a column carved from stone. Her navy blue uniform was immaculate, creased just right, not a wrinkle or strand of thread out of place. A small gold pin gleamed on her lapel. 10 years of elite service, a badge she wore like a shield. She scanned the lounge with the precision of a museum curator guarding her gallery. Caroline didn't just work first class, she defined it. In her mind, it was her responsibility to ensure that only the right kind of passengers graced the front cabin. Luxury, exclusivity, refinement. That was the brand. She protected it fiercely. As her eyes swept across the room, they paused ever so briefly on the woman by the window, Evelyn Turner. Caroline took in the polished cane, the silk scarf, the silver hair. But what she saw was something else. Age modest, attire, a presence too quiet to be important. She didn't recognize Evelyn. And in Caroline's world, first class was filled with names she did recognize. Executives from Wall Street media personalities, high-status families. If she didn't know you, you probably didn't belong. Caroline turned away, passenger in the corner. She murmured to her coworker. Julie, a junior attendant stationed beside her. Window seat, green dress. Probably lost. Keep an eye on her when boarding starts. Julie glanced over, then shrugged. She looks like she knows where she's going. Caroline arched a perfectly tweezed brow. They all look like that at first. Julie didn't respond. She'd worked with Caroline long enough to know when not to argue. Caroline prided herself on spotting inconsistencies before they became issues. A misplaced ticket. An economy-class passenger trying to sneak ahead. People misreading the signs or testing the limits. She called it instinct. Others called it something else, but not to her face. First class is more than a seat, she had once told a new hire. It's an experience, an image, and not everyone fits. And Caroline believed herself the guardian of that image. She turned back to the lounge, eyes now resting on a trio of suited men sharing a quiet laugh near the espresso bar, a hedge fund partner, a retired NFL player, and a luxury real estate mogul. They fit. Then her gaze flicked back toward Evelyn, still seated, still serene. The woman hadn't moved in nearly 30 minutes. Caroline felt a pang of irritation. The elderly could be tricky, not because they were problematic, but because they could draw sympathy. And Caroline had little patience for sentimental drama at the gate. She liked precision, control, predictability. She's not on the manifest, Caroline muttered. I would have noticed. Julie glanced again. Maybe she checked in early. Caroline didn't reply. She didn't like not knowing. It made her uneasy. She tapped her tablet, pulling up the passenger list. No Evelyn Turner in the highlighted first-class roster, at least not by name. She frowned, unsure if it was a clerical delay or a misreading. Either way, it confirmed her suspicion the woman was in the wrong section, probably booked in coach. Maybe someone's grandmother on a standby upgrade. Caroline had seen it before, people dressing carefully, walking confidently, trying to pass. But they didn't fool her, and they wouldn't today. She tucked the tablet under her arm and turned toward the boarding gate as a chime sounded overhead. Attention. First-class passengers for Flight 382 to Los Angeles. We will begin boarding shortly. Caroline took her position at the velvet rope, a calm smile painted across her lips. Her eyes remained sharp. She was ready to perform her duty, and if that woman by the window tried to walk through, she'd be reminded exactly where she belonged. The overhead announcement echoed through the lounge like a slow roll of thunder. First-class passengers for Flight 382 to Los Angeles now boarding at Gate A5. Chairs shifted, briefcases zipped. A few passengers stood and straightened their tailored blazers. Among them was Jordan Ellis, the young tech executive who had earlier offered Evelyn his seat. He moved with practiced confidence, boarding pass in hand. Evelyn Turner remained still for a moment. She finished the last sip of her tea. Then slowly and deliberately, she rose from her seat. The polished maple cane in her hand clicked gently against the tiled floor as she stepped toward the gate. Heads turned. Just a few. A middle-aged man in a Burberry coat glanced up, eyes flickering with confusion. A woman in pearls shifted slightly in line, pretending not to notice Evelyn moving toward the front. The dissonance of image and placement. The elderly black woman in the silk scarf and cane stood out more sharply than anyone dared admit aloud. Caroline Reeves caught sight of her immediately. Her smile tightened. Evelyn moved forward with the same calm she had displayed in the lounge, unhurried, precise. She extended her boarding pass with a graceful motion, her wrist light but steady. Caroline didn't even look at it, ma'am, she said crisply, stepping sideways and raising a hand like a velvet rope. This line is for first class only. Evelyn didn't flinch. I know, she said, her tone smooth and composed. I believe that's what I purchased. Caroline let out a sharp exhale through her nose, equal parts disbelief and irritation. She flicked a glance at the boarding pass, still not reaching for it. Her eyes scanned Evelyn's scarf, her shoes, the cane, the way her carry-on lacked any visible designer branding. You're sure this is your boarding pass? She asked slowly, as though Evelyn might have wandered in from another gate. I am, Evelyn replied. her voice neither defensive nor apologetic. Behind her, Jordan Ellis took a step forward in line. He didn't speak, but his expression darkened slightly. He remembered the quiet strength in Evelyn's smile when he had offered her his seat. That same strength was now standing against a wall of unspoken rules. Caroline finally reached for the ticket. Her fingers plucked it with exaggerated precision, lifting it high toward the overhead light as if expecting to find forgery ink bleeding through the paper. "Turner, Evelyn Turner," she muttered. "Well, it's not a name I recognize." She didn't mean for Evelyn to hear it, but Evelyn did. Still, she didn't react. Only the barest narrowing of her eyes like a cloud briefly passing over sunlight. Caroline tapped the screen of her tablet again. Still nothing pulled up under Evelyn's name on the preview list. The system lagged sometimes. That was her excuse. "I'm going to need to check this," she said, and waved to another attendant stalling the line. People in the queue began to shift uncomfortably. A few lowered their voices. A woman in diamonds glanced from Evelyn to Caroline and then looked away, pretending to check her phone. The energy at the gate had turned brittle like a piano string pulled too tight. Evelyn stood motionless. She made no plea, no fuss, no effort to prove herself beyond handing over the boarding pass. She waited, calm, collected. As though she had encountered this before, Caroline narrowed her eyes. "If there's been some sort of mistake," she said, her voice laced with a syrupy condescension, "you'll be asked to board with your assigned group." Evelyn raised her gaze, meeting Caroline's head-on for the first time. "There is no mistake," she said. "This is my seat." The air around them seemed to still. Caroline pursed her lips, but for the first time a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, behind Evelyn Jordan. Ellis tilted his head. He didn't step in. Not yet, but he was watching closely. The lounge's quiet rhythm shattered the moment Evelyn stepped forward. "Ma'am," Caroline Reeves called out again, this time with a sharper edge. "This lane is for first-class boarding." Evelyn offered no irritation, only grace. "I know." Caroline extended a hand. "Then I'll need to see your boarding pass." Without hesitation, Evelyn passed it over. Her hands were steady, calm, confident. But Caroline snatched the pass, examining it with visible disdain. She held it up to the overhead lights as if it might be counterfeit. Her lips curled. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered under her breath. Then louder for those around to hear. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" Evelyn nodded once. "Yes, I'm sure." Passengers nearby were starting to notice. A hush rippled through the line as heads turned. A woman in sunglasses paused mid-step. A child gripped his father's hand tighter. Caroline seemed unfazed by the attention. With one swift, dismissive motion, she slapped the boarding pass from Evelyn's hand. It fluttered through the air, landing on the polished floor beside Evelyn's cane, which had fallen during the scuffle. Gasps broke through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Did she just—" A young woman near the rope line instinctively raised her phone and began recording. Evelyn didn't flinch. Instead, she bent slowly with the care and precision of someone who'd had to maintain composure in situations far worse than this. She retrieved her cane with one hand, her boarding pass with the other, then she straightened and looked directly at Caroline. Her voice was steady, not loud, not angry, but piercing. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." The temperature in the terminal dropped. Even Caroline's smug expression faltered, but she recovered quickly, too quickly. "Ma'am," she snapped, "if you don't step aside, I will call security." Behind Evelyn, murmurs began to grow. Jordan Ellis was now clearly in view, his brows knitted, jaw tight. He said nothing, but his gaze was locked on Caroline. His silence wasn't indifference, it was calculation. Caroline turned slightly, seeing the gathering crowd, but missing the shift in their expressions. "I don't know how you managed to get this pass," she said with a sneer. "But it's not valid." Evelyn said nothing. Her eyes, deep and quiet, locked with Caroline's. That silence was heavier than any outburst. Caroline raised her hand, motioning toward the service phone. "You leave me no choice." But just before she could dial, Evelyn's voice came again, low and even colder than before. "I suggest you stop right there." There was something about the way she said it, something old, something rooted in generations of dignity no one could strip away. Her cane tapped softly as she took a single step forward. Not aggressive, just deliberate. Caroline hesitated. All around them, time seemed to slow. What had started as a routine boarding had now become something else entirely. A public theater of prejudice, arrogance, and power. And it wasn't over yet. Caroline's fingers hovered just above the intercom button. Her breath was short, her mouth tight with frustration. "Security to gate A6, she muttered under her breath, already visualizing Evelyn being escorted out in shame. But before her hand could press the call button, a firm voice rang out from behind. "That won't be necessary." The voice was calm, commanding, and threaded with authority so absolute it cut through the terminal noise like a blade. Everyone turned. Striding down the carpeted walkway was a tall man in a sharp navy blue suit. His steps were confident, measured. A laminated badge bearing the gold crest of the airline swayed slightly on his chest. His name tag read, "Charles Mason, Vice President, Client Relations." Caroline's hand froze in place. Charles didn't look at her. Instead, he walked straight to Evelyn Turner and inclined his head respectfully. "Mrs. Turner," he said, voice low and sincere, "on behalf of the entire airline, allow me to personally welcome you. We've been expecting you." The air changed instantly. Murmurs rippled across the boarding area. People who had just watched Evelyn's humiliation now stared in disbelief. Caroline's eyes widened. "You've been expecting her," she repeated dumbly. Charles finally turned to Caroline, his expression unreadable, but his jaw was set tight. "Yes, Miss Reeves," he said coolly. "Mrs. Turner is one of our most valued guests. You just denied entry to someone whose contributions built more of this airline than most employees will understand in their lifetime." Caroline swallowed throat dry. I didn't know her ticket. She presented a valid first-class boarding pass, which you ignored." Charles interrupted sharply. His voice wasn't raised, but its quiet firmness carried the weight of consequence. "And you struck her hand in front of passengers." More heads turned. A few people instinctively stepped back from Caroline as though guilt might be contagious. One woman clutched her phone tighter still. Recording, Charles took a single step closer, lowering his voice only for her. "Do you even realize who you just insulted in front of a plane full of people?" Caroline's mind raced. Her legs wobbled. "I thought there was a mistake," she said more to herself than anyone else. "You made a mistake," Charles replied coldly. Evelyn hadn't moved. She simply watched in silence, the quiet power in her posture unmistakable. Charles turned to her again. "Mrs. Turner, we're deeply sorry for this experience. Please allow me to escort you to your seat." Evelyn nodded once, serene as ever. "Of course." Charles turned back. "Miss Reeves," he said flatly, "step aside." Caroline didn't move. He narrowed his eyes. "Now." With every passenger watching, Caroline stepped back, heart pounding. Her ears burned as the weight of judgment surrounded her. She had always ruled her domain with sharp efficiency, but now, for the first time, she was no longer in control. As Charles gently guided Evelyn toward the boarding bridge, whispers followed in their wake, and Caroline stood there alone, exposed and beginning to understand the gravity of what she'd just done. Maya Hill had only been a flight attendant for 2 years, but she knew instinctively when something was wrong. As the chaos at the gate subsided, Charles Mason gave her a subtle nod. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, her voice gentle, her movements respectful. "Mrs. Turner," Maya said softly, offering her arm. "May I escort you to your seat?" Evelyn looked up, her expression calm, despite everything. She nodded once, accepting the gesture with quiet dignity. The crowd around them parted almost instinctively, as if sensing they were in the presence of someone far greater than they had realized just moments before. As they walked toward the aircraft, the rhythmic sound of Evelyn's polished maple cane echoed against the floor like a metronome counting down to judgment. Maya's expression tightened as they approached the jet bridge, her cheeks flushed with shame, not for something she had done, but for what had been allowed to unfold so publicly. "I'm truly sorry for what happened back there," Maya said quietly, once they stepped onto the plane. "You didn't deserve that. None of it." Evelyn turned slightly, her eyes soft. "Thank you, dear," she replied. "But don't let shame, that isn't yours, weigh you down." They reached row 1A. Maya leaned in and lifted Evelyn's carry-on with care, placing it in the overhead bin before adjusting the seat controls and gently helping her settle in. Evelyn gave her a kind smile, one that said more than words ever could. Meanwhile, in the galley, Caroline Reeves stood frozen, heart pounding, her world unraveling faster than she could hold it together. She could still feel the eyes of the passengers boring into her back. Her fingers twitched nervously as she tried to smooth down the front of her uniform to somehow will herself back into control. Then the intercom buzzed, a clipped voice from the cockpit. "Miss Reeves, report to the flight deck, immediately." The words sliced through her like a cold blade. Caroline swallowed hard. Her heels clicked too loudly against the floor as she walked down the aisle past the same passengers she had just tried to impress, past Evelyn Turner, who now sat calmly with her eyes closed and her hands resting on her lap, like royalty. Caroline knocked once, then entered. Inside the cockpit, Captain Joel Raines sat upright, his hands resting calmly on the throttle. His gaze was unreadable. Beside him on the central screen, a secure video call had already connected. The corporate vice president of the airline, Alan Prescott, stared back with the cold composure of a man who had seen enough. "Miss Reeves," the captain began, his voice low but unmistakably stern, "you've just been involved in a serious incident." Caroline nodded quickly, hoping to explain. "I was only trying to enforce the boarding." Alan Prescott raised a hand on the screen. "Stop." Caroline fell silent. "That woman," he said, slowly enunciating every word, "is Evelyn Turner. The Evelyn Turner. She is the founder of this airline and its current chairwoman." Caroline's breath caught in her throat. Alan leaned in closer. "You assaulted the most powerful woman in this company, in public, in front of passengers, and recorded devices. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" The cockpit seemed to tilt around her. Caroline's knees nearly gave out, but she managed to stay upright, her hand gripping the edge of the doorframe. I didn't know," she whispered. Captain Raines glanced at the screen, then back at Caroline. "You didn't care to know," he said flatly. The silence that followed was suffocating. The first-class cabin had gone still. Passengers barely moved, their attention fixed on the aisle where Caroline Reeves stood motionless, eyes wide, face pale, hands trembling against her pressed navy skirt. The murmurs that had rippled through the aircraft after Charles Mason's intervention had died into a taut, waiting silence. She could feel it, every gaze weighing down on her. Jordan Ellis was still seated just 2 rows away, his jaw clenched, his brow furrowed. Others who had witnessed the confrontation at the gate now waited to see if justice would be served. Captain Reynolds's command echoed in her memory like a hammer striking steel. "You will walk out there and deliver a full public apology. If you refuse, your career ends before this plane leaves the runway." She swallowed her throat, parched. Then, summoning the last of her composure, Caroline stepped forward, one slow, reluctant foot in front of the other toward the woman she had insulted, humiliated, and dismissed. Evelyn Turner sat in her seat with effortless poise. Her cane leaned gracefully against the aisle armrest. A silk scarf the color of wine pooled at her collarbone. Her eyes followed Caroline with neither malice nor smugness, only stillness, watchful, measured, unblinking. Caroline stopped beside her and took a shaky breath. "Mrs. Turner," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you a sincere apology." Evelyn said nothing. Her gaze held. "I misjudged you. I questioned your right to be here without cause. My behavior was unprofessional and deeply inappropriate." The cabin remained silent. The weight of every watching face made Caroline's hands sweat. She clasped them tightly together to stop them from shaking. Evelyn tilted her head ever so slightly. Then, with a tone as calm as still water, she said, "And now please repeat it for them." Caroline blinked. "Excuse me, for the passengers," Evelyn said. "They heard your humiliation. They deserve to hear your apology." The air inside the cabin thickened. Caroline's stomach twisted into a knot. Her voice faltered. "Is that really—" "It is," Evelyn replied gently, but without a trace of flexibility. "Respect. Miss Reeves cannot be selectively distributed." Behind them, Jordan sat upright, eyes narrowed in silent expectation. A woman in row 2 subtly pulled out her phone. This moment, too, would be remembered. Caroline felt the world press down on her shoulders. Her mind screamed to run, to hide in the galley, to disappear. But the truth was louder now. She turned slowly to face the cabin. "I want to apologize to all of you," she said, forcing each word through the tightness in her throat. "Earlier today, I wrongfully questioned a passenger's right to board this flight in first class. I did so based solely on my own assumptions. I disrespected Mrs. Turner and I humiliated her." Gasps from the gate echoed in memory. The slap, the cane clattering to the floor. "I treated her as someone who didn't belong when she did. Entirely." She lowered her gaze, no longer able to meet the eyes of those who watched. Her voice cracked. "I'm deeply sorry." A heavy silence settled, and in that silence Evelyn's voice rose quiet but unmistakable. "Thank you, Miss Reeves. But I have one question." Caroline turned to her, uncertain. If I were just another black woman boarding this flight, no wealth, no title, no power, would you still be apologizing? The question was a blade, and it cut deep. Caroline stood frozen, the answer roaring inside her, but she couldn't speak it. Not yet. The cabin had quieted, but the tension clung to the air like static. Caroline stood near the galley, her back stiff, her hands clenched so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. She had just finished preparing Evelyn Turner's tea tray, an elegant porcelain cup resting on a linen napkin, a single sugar cube placed carefully on the side. Every motion she made now was deliberate robotic, the fluid confidence that once defined her stripped away like old paint under pressure. She walked slowly down the aisle toward first class. Every eye seemed to track her. Some were subtle, quick glances over newspapers, phones held but no longer scrolling. Others stared openly. Among them sat Jordan Ellis, the young tech executive who had earlier offered Evelyn a seat. He didn't blink as she passed. Caroline reached Evelyn's row and lowered the tray table gently. "Your chamomile tea." "Mrs. Turner," she said, voice just above a whisper. Evelyn accepted it with a nod, her poise unshaken. "Thank you," she replied simply, her tone neither cold nor warm, just composed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Caroline hovered, unsure whether to leave or stay. Then Evelyn looked up, eyes calm but piercing. "Ms. Reeves," she said evenly, "may I ask you a question?" Caroline's heart jumped. "Yes, ma'am. If I weren't the founder of this airline, would you be apologizing at all?" The words fell like a quiet thunderclap. The rows around them went still again. Even the soft hum of the engines seemed to dip for a second, as if waiting for her reply. Caroline opened her mouth, then closed it. Her throat tightened. She had practiced answers, polished responses, but none of them could survive the weight of that question. Finally she nodded, eyes lowered. "No, I wouldn't." There was no justification in her voice, no defense, just truth, stripped bare. Evelyn held her gaze a moment longer, then gently stirred her tea. "Honesty is a start," she said, her voice so low Caroline had to lean slightly to hear it. "But character is proven in silence, not in front of cameras, not under orders." Behind Caroline, Richard, one of the airline's senior executives, appeared. He stood just outside the curtain, then stepped in. "Ms. Reeves," he said in a tone firm but controlled, "you are to remain in this cabin for the duration of the flight, and you will personally attend to Mrs. Turner's needs." Caroline turned toward him but said nothing. "That will be all," Richard added, then quietly stepped away. For a long moment Caroline didn't move. Then with effort she looked back to Evelyn. "Yes, ma'am. Of course." Maya, the younger flight attendant, returned briefly to check on Evelyn. She offered a gentle nod, her presence like a soft breeze after a storm. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked. Evelyn smiled faintly. "No, dear, I'm quite fine." Maya glanced at Caroline before walking away, her expression unreadable. Left alone again, Caroline remained standing awkwardly at the side. She felt exposed not just to the passengers but to something deeper, her own unraveling. Evelyn hadn't humiliated her. She had simply asked a question no script could rescue her from. And now Caroline had to carry the answer. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the captain's voice crackled over the intercom announcing their descent into Dallas. Evelyn Turner sat calmly by the window, her posture relaxed, eyes reflecting the pale glow of the clouds outside. The tension that had once choked the first-class cabin now gave way to a heavy stillness. But inside Caroline Reeves, the turbulence hadn't stopped. She walked the aisle slowly, offering small nods to passengers she now couldn't meet in the eye. Her service had been flawless ever since the apology, but mechanical, distant. As she approached Evelyn one last time, her chest tightened. Evelyn glanced up without a word. Her expression hadn't changed since the confrontation, serene, composed, unshaken. The same quiet power that had unraveled everything still lingered like perfume in the air. "Mrs. Turner," Caroline said, her voice softer than it had been all flight, "I wanted to thank you again for your patience." Evelyn turned to her, eyes steady. "You don't owe me thanks," she replied evenly. "Only truth." Caroline swallowed. There were no distractions now, no boarding chaos, no audience, just her and the woman who had every right to demand retribution and hadn't. Evelyn looked back toward the window. "Can I ask you something?" Caroline nodded slowly. Evelyn didn't turn. Her voice was gentle but carried deep weight. "Has anyone ever made you feel like you didn't belong here?" The words struck harder than any reprimand. Caroline's first instinct was to say no. She had worked for this airline for over a decade. She had earned her position. She had worn her uniform with pride-controlled cabins with precision and never once questioned whether she deserved to be here. But that wasn't the question. The truth settled slowly, bitter and undeniable. No, no one had made her feel that way. No one had doubted her right to serve first class. No one had dismissed her at first glance. That kind of shame, that kind of exclusion, it had never belonged to her. But she had handed it freely to Evelyn. "I haven't," she finally said, her voice tight. "But I think now I understand a little of what it feels like." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She reached down gently, adjusting her cane. "It's not just about understanding," she said at last. "It's about remembering. The next time you see someone who doesn't look the part, I hope this moment whispers to you." Caroline stood there quietly. The hum of the engines surrounded them, but it was Evelyn's words that echoed. She nodded slowly. "It already does." The wheels touched down with a soft thud, but the tension inside Caroline Reeves did not ease with the landing. As passengers stirred from their quiet reflection and began reaching for their belongings, Caroline remained rooted near the galley, her breath tight in her chest. The captain's voice over the intercom was calm and customary, but for her it might as well have been the toll of judgment. Just minutes later she was called. A flight operations agent approached discreetly, murmuring that the airline's leadership team needed to speak with her immediately. She expected this, braced for it. Still, her legs felt numb as she stepped off the aircraft. The terminal beyond the gate buzzed with its usual chaos, families reuniting travelers on phones, employees pushing carts of luggage. But to Caroline, the world had gone curiously still. And there, sitting composedly in the private arrivals lounge, was Evelyn Turner. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. Her presence alone, the cane resting beside her, the steady poise in her shoulders commanded every ounce of Caroline's awareness. The same woman she'd dismissed not hours ago now sat like a pillar, unshaken as Caroline passed under the heavy silence of consequence. Security and a senior assistant escorted Caroline into a conference room with glass walls and blinds already drawn. Inside, two executives waited: James Whitmore, Director of Customer Experience, and Elaine Hastings, a senior VP who rarely handled in-flight personnel issues unless something major had occurred. The gravity was clear. James gestured toward a chair. "Have a seat, Ms. Reeves." Caroline obeyed. Her posture was rigid, her eyes darting only once toward the thick manila folders in front of them, testimonies, passenger reports, maybe even cell phone recordings. Elaine spoke first, her voice clipped. "You know why you're here?" Caroline nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "What happened on Flight 7829 was more than a customer service failure," James said firmly. "It was a public act of humiliation rooted in bias. You physically struck a boarding pass from a passenger's hand. That alone could warrant dismissal." "I understand," Caroline replied, her voice soft. James opened one of the folders, flipping to the incident report. But before reading further, he paused. "Mrs. Turner," he said, "has requested that you be given an opportunity to explain yourself. Otherwise, this conversation would have ended before it began." Caroline looked up, startled. She did." Elaine nodded. "She did. She asked for a hearing. Not because she excuses what you did, but because she believes in accountability through understanding." And so Caroline spoke. No longer defensive, no longer rehearsed. Her words came slowly at first, halting, uneven, but they carried a rawness that couldn't be faked. "I was wrong," she began. "Not just in what I did, but in how I think I looked at Mrs. Turner and saw what I expected to see, not who she really was. And that wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection of something I need to confront in myself." Elaine leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. "Why do you want to stay, Ms. Reeves?" Caroline swallowed hard. "Not to save my job, to prove that I can change, that I understand now what I didn't before, that respect shouldn't be conditional. I want to make this right, not just for her, but for everyone I've dismissed in the past without even knowing it." The room fell into silence. James closed the folder. "You'll be placed on probation," he said at last. "Effective immediately. Mandatory anti-bias and restorative service training. You'll be monitored closely for 6 months." Relief washed over Caroline, not because she'd been spared, but because she'd been given a road forward. As she stepped out of the room, Evelyn Turner was still seated in the lounge. Their eyes met. Caroline moved toward her slowly. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quietly, "but I'll carry what I've learned." Evelyn stood with ease and grace. "Make it meaningful," she replied gently, "or none of it will matter." And with that, Evelyn walked away, her polished cane tapping softly on the marble floor, a sound that Caroline would never forget. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. This story shows that unchecked bias leads to humiliation and consequences, while dignity and calm strength reveal true leadership. It reminds us that discrimination, especially subtle everyday prejudice, still exists. Such incidents still happen in workplaces, on airplanes, and in the quiet corners of everyday life. In our personal lives, we should challenge our assumptions before making judgments. In the workplace, we must treat every person with equal respect, no matter how they look or where they come from. As a community, we must hold space for truth, accountability, and growth. By practicing respect and humility, we build a more inclusive and just society.